Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. It was a cold night in late November when my life changed forever. I remember the quiet stillness of the house, the kind that settles in after everyone has gone to bed. We had just finished dinner a few hours before, and I was upstairs doing homework while the rest of my family was either watching television or getting ready to sleep. Everything felt normal, peaceful even, and I had no reason to believe that anything was about to go terribly wrong. That night would become a permanent scar on my memory. Around 11 p.m., I decided to go to the kitchen to grab a glass of water. The house was dark, except for the hallway light, and I moved quietly so I would not wake anyone. Just as I stepped into the kitchen, I heard a strange sound from the back door, a soft rattling noise that made me stop in my tracks. At first I thought it might be the wind or maybe a raccoon, but then I heard it again, louder this time. My heart started to beat a little faster, but I still told myself it was nothing. Before I could take another step, I heard the unmistakable sound of the door crashing open. My blood ran cold as I froze, unable to move. Then came the heavy footsteps, fast and deliberate, heading into the living room. I ducked behind the kitchen counter, holding my breath, trying to process what was happening. I had never known fear like that before, the kind that takes over your entire body. I heard voices, low and angry, and then a loud bang. It was a gunshot. I knew then that this was not a robbery or a break-in gone wrong. This was something much worse. I could hear the panic in the air, my family waking up, shouting, trying to understand what was going on. I wanted to run to them, to help, but I was frozen with fear. One by one, the gunshots rang out, and with each one, I knew something terrible was happening to the people I loved. I buried my face in my hands, tears pouring down as I trembled in silence. I could hear crying screams, and then another shot, followed by silence. The only sound left was the pounding of my heart in my chest and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I stayed hidden, paralyzed by fear and grief. For minutes passed. It felt like hours. The intruders moved around the house, opening drawers and doors, searching for valuables, or maybe making sure there were no witnesses. I tried not to breathe too loudly, terrified they would find me. Every creak in the floor made my heart skip. Every step closer made me want to disappear. Eventually, the footsteps grew distant and then faded completely. I waited in silence, not daring to move, afraid it might be a trick. I could not hear anything anymore. I do not know how long I stayed there, but eventually, I forced myself to crawl out from behind the counter. My legs were weak, my hands shaking, and my mind was barely able to understand what I might find. I stepped over broken glass and moved slowly through the house. The sight that met my eyes will haunt me for the rest of my life. My family was gone. They had been taken from me in the most brutal way imaginable. I collapsed to the ground, sobbing, unable to believe that this was real. Somehow I managed to find the phone and dial 911. My voice cracked as I spoke, barely able to tell the operator what had happened. The words felt hollow and unreal. The dispatcher tried to keep me calm while help was on the way. I remember holding the phone tightly, as if it were the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights painting the night sky with red and blue. I ran to them, crying, and they took me outside where it was safe. I was the only one left. I kept thinking maybe this was a nightmare and I would wake up any moment, but I never did. The nightmare was real. I was taken to the hospital for evaluation. They asked me many questions and I answered as best as I could, though my mind was still foggy with shock. They treated me gently, with compassion, but nothing they said could erase the horror of what I had seen. I kept replaying it all in my head, wondering why I survived. I was alive, but at what cost? In the days that followed, I stayed with relatives who tried to comfort me, but there was little they could say that helped. I kept to myself, lost in memories of my family, the laughter we shared, and the warmth that used to fill our home. I felt empty, like a piece of me had been ripped away. The world seemed quieter, colder, and far more dangerous than I ever thought possible. Investigators worked around the clock to find the people responsible. I gave them every detail I could remember, though it was not much. I had not seen any faces, only heard voices and footsteps. They took fingerprints, collected evidence, and promised me they would find justice. I wanted to believe them, but I knew it would never bring my family back. And therapy became a part of my life. At first I did not want to talk, but eventually the words began to flow. I learned how to grieve, how to remember my loved ones without being consumed by pain. Healing was slow, and some days it felt impossible. But I kept going, because I knew that was what they would have wanted me to do. The community came together in support, and their kindness meant more to me than they knew. People brought meals, sent letters, and held vigils. They reminded me that there was still good in the world, even in the face of such evil. Their support was like a light in the darkness, guiding me through the worst days. Over time, I began to rebuild. I went back to school, though I was different than before. I saw life in a new way, more fragile and more precious. I tried to find meaning in the tragedy, to use my experience to help others. It was not easy, but it gave me purpose. Eventually, there was a break in the case. Through a tip and some forensic evidence, the police were able to identify the suspects. They were arrested and charged, and I attended every court hearing. It was painful to face them, but I needed to see it through. Justice did not erase the past, but it gave me closure. Years passed, and though the wounds never fully healed, I found peace. I speak to groups now, sharing my story to raise awareness and help other survivors. I talk about grief, trauma, and the strength it takes to keep going. My voice shakes sometimes, but I keep speaking. I do it for my family. I have learned that survival does not mean you are whole, but it means you still have a chance to live. I honor my loved ones by living fully, by loving deeply, and by never forgetting. Their memories with me in every step I take, in every breath I draw. They are gone, but I carry them in my heart always. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who has walked through fire and made it out alive. I see someone who refused to let tragedy define them. I still cry sometimes, and I still miss them every single day. But I am no longer trapped by fear. I am free to live, to hope, and to love again. What happened that night changed me forever. I lost everything, yet I found a strength I never knew I had. There are no words to truly describe the pain, but there is power in surviving it. I will never forget what happened, and I will never stop fighting to make sure others do not suffer the same. My story is one of loss, but also one of hope. Story 2. It started subtly at first. I would wake up feeling more tired than usual, as if my sleep had been disturbed, even though I remembered no nightmares or noises. My appetite shifted, and meals that I once enjoyed now made me feel slightly nauseous. I brushed it off as stress, maybe even a lingering flu. There was nothing alarming enough to warrant a doctor's visit just yet. Weeks passed, and the symptoms only intensified. I felt dizzy more often, and sometimes struggled to keep my balance while walking. My hands would tremble slightly, especially in the mornings. Tasks I once did with ease now required concentration and effort. I kept telling myself that it was just exhaustion from my busy schedule. Eventually, I began experiencing headaches that would not go away. No matter how much water I drank or how long I rested, the pounding behind my eyes would persist. I also noticed my skin growing paler, and my lips seemed constantly dry and cracked. The friends would comment on how tired I looked, which only added to my worry. Still, I avoided going to the hospital, convincing myself that it would pass. Living with my roommate had always been convenient. We shared the rent and chores, and for the most part, coexisted peacefully. We did not have deep conversations, but I had no reason to mistrust them. In fact, they often brought me coffee or snacks when I looked particularly tired. I considered it a kind gesture, one I appreciated without question. Over time, the physical symptoms became harder to ignore. I began losing weight despite eating regularly. My hair thinned out, clumps falling into the drain after every shower. I started to develop a persistent cough and often felt winded walking upstairs. Something was clearly wrong, but I could not pinpoint what it was. I finally scheduled a visit with a doctor, hoping for answers. The doctor ran several blood tests and asked about my diet, lifestyle, and stress levels. When the results came back, they were inconclusive. My body showed signs of malnutrition and possibly toxicity, but there was no clear cause. The doctor suggested a more detailed examination and a referral to a specialist. I left the clinic confused and scared, unsure what to do next. Around this time, I began to notice odd things in the apartment. My water bottle sometimes had a strange aftertaste, which I dismissed as unwashed dishes or old pipes. The food in the fridge occasionally seemed to go bad quicker than usual. My roommate remained kind and helpful, always checking on me and asking if I needed anything. I appreciated the concern, but also began to feel a quiet sense of unease. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. As I stepped inside, I heard a quick shuffle from the kitchen. My roommate stood near the counter, startled to see me. They claimed they were just making tea, and I believed them at the time. But something about their expression did not sit right with me. It was the first time I truly questioned their intentions. The next day, I decided to keep a closer watch on my surroundings. I started marking the water levels in my bottles, noting the positions of food containers in the fridge. I even set up a small camera hidden inside a decorative shelf. It was a step I never thought I would take, but I needed clarity. I needed to know if I was imagining things or if something sinister was happening. A few days later, I reviewed the footage from the camera. What I saw chilled me to the core. My roommate was tampering with my drinks while I was out. They would take bottles, open them, pour in something from a small vial, then carefully put everything back in place. My heart raced as I watched it unfold. I could not deny it any longer. I went to the police immediately, bringing the footage as evidence. They opened a case and advised me to stay somewhere else while they investigated. I packed a small bag that night and left the apartment, still shaken. I stayed with a friend and waited for updates from the authorities. Every hour felt like an eternity. It turned out that the substance being used was a slow-acting toxin, difficult to detect without specific testing. It caused the very symptoms I had been experiencing: fatigue, weight loss, neurological issues, and more. The police found traces of it in my water bottles and in the food items I often consumed. There was no longer any question about what had been happening. The realization that someone I lived with had been slowly poisoning me was difficult to accept. I kept asking myself why. What reason could there possibly be? I had never harmed or threatened them in any way. We had lived together peacefully, or so I had thought. The authorities later discovered that my roommate had a history of instability and unresolved issues from past relationships. They were arrested and charged, and I was advised to press charges. I agreed, though it brought me little satisfaction. The betrayal ran too deep for any courtroom resolution to truly heal. I began therapy soon after, seeking to understand how I had missed the signs. Recovering from the poisoning was a slow process. I had to rebuild my health from the inside out, guided by a team of doctors and nutritionists. My body had been weakened significantly, and every step forward required effort and patience. Emotionally, I struggled even more. I questioned my judgment and became wary of everyone around me. But I also learned to listen to myself more. I no longer brushed off symptoms or discomfort. If something felt off, I paid attention. I kept my space secure and no longer took people's kindness at face value. Caution became part of my routine, but it did not harden me completely. I still wanted to believe in the goodness of others, just with better awareness. As weeks turned into months, my strength began to return. I gained weight, my energy increased, and my outlook slowly shifted from fear to resilience. I found new hobbies to ground myself: gardening, journaling, and spending time outdoors. These small things reminded me that life could still be beautiful despite what I had endured. Eventually, I moved into a new apartment, one where I lived alone. It brought a deep sense of relief to close my own door at night, knowing I was safe. The silence no longer scared me, it comforted me. I built routines that prioritized my well-being, both physical and emotional. I began to trust myself again. People often ask how I managed to survive that experience. My answer is always the same. It was not one single moment of strength, it was 100 small choices. Choosing to stay curious when things felt off. Choosing to take action when I found the evidence. Choosing to heal, even when the path was slow and uncertain. Each choice brought me closer to safety. I do not live in fear anymore, but I do live with awareness. I understand now how easily danger can hide in plain sight, disguised as familiarity or even care. That understanding has made me more cautious, but also more appreciative of the good people in my life. I know what it means to lose control, and I value the power of reclaiming it. Looking back, I know I am lucky to be alive. Many who go through similar experiences do not get the chance to tell their story. That truth keeps me humble and grateful. I carry the lessons of those months with me, not as weight, but as wisdom. They remind me every day of what I have overcome. Now I use my voice to help others recognize the signs I once missed. I share my experience not out of bitterness, but in hope that it can protect someone else. Because healing is not just about recovery, it is about using what you have been through to light the way for others. And that, more than anything, has brought peace back into my life. Story 3. I had a long day at work, and all I wanted was to go home and relax. It was already past 8 in the evening when I opened the ride-sharing app on my phone. The driver arrived a few minutes later, and I got into the car without giving it much thought. I confirmed my address and leaned back against the seat, closing my eyes for a moment. The hum of the engine and the soft music playing on the radio made me feel like I could finally unwind. We drove for several minutes, and I started to notice that the route felt unfamiliar. I opened my eyes and glanced out the window, trying to make sense of where we were. The lights of the city were growing dimmer, and the buildings around us were becoming more industrial. My heart rate picked up slightly, and I leaned forward to check the GPS on the screen in front. To my surprise, the route displayed on the app did not match the direction we were going. I cleared my throat and asked the driver if everything was all right. He nodded but said nothing, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. His silence felt unnatural, and I could feel a chill creep down my spine. I glanced at my phone and noticed that the app no longer showed my estimated time of arrival. Panic started to rise inside me as I realized something was not right. But I asked the driver again where we were going, but this time he ignored me completely. I repeated myself, louder now, trying to hide the fear in my voice. Still, he did not answer. My fingers tightened around my phone, and I thought about calling someone, anyone. But I hesitated, unsure of what to do if he noticed and tried to stop me. The streets grew more deserted, and soon we were driving past empty lots and graffiti-covered walls. I had no idea where we were, but it was clear we were far from the route to my home. I tried to open the door, but the lock was engaged, and I realized I could not get out. My stomach twisted into knots, and I searched for a way to escape. Every second that passed made the situation feel more hopeless. Eventually, the car slowed down and turned into a narrow, shadowy alley. The headlights revealed a rusted metal gate ahead, which slowly creaked open as we approached. He drove inside without hesitation, and the gate clanged shut behind us. The place looked like an old warehouse, surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken concrete. I could barely breathe as I realized how isolated we were. He parked the car and turned off the engine, then sat there in silence. My heartbeat was loud in my ears as I waited for what would happen next. The driver finally turned to look at me, but his expression was unreadable. I did not know what he was thinking, and I could not tell if he meant to harm me. Every instinct told me I had to get away as quickly as possible. He got out of the car and walked around to the passenger side, his footsteps echoing in the quiet. I scrambled to unlock the door, but it would not budge. He opened it from the outside, and I froze, unsure whether to scream or run. He reached in and grabbed my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to make me realize I had no choice. I was pulled out of the car and led toward the warehouse. The door creaked open as he pushed it, revealing a dark interior filled with crates and dust. The air smelled musty, like old wood and oil. He led me through the space without a word, his grip still tight on my arm. I tried to memorize every corner, every turn, in case I needed to run. But the darkness made it hard to see anything clearly. We stopped in front of a small room in the back, and he pushed the door open. Inside was a single chair, a table, and a flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. He motioned for me to sit, and I obeyed, afraid of what might happen if I resisted. He sat across from me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I waited, hoping that this was all a mistake or a bad dream. He finally spoke, his voice low and calm. He told me he was not going to hurt me, but that he needed to talk to someone. I stared at him, uncertain confused and frightened. Why had he brought me all the way here just to talk? It made no sense, and I could not believe that this was all there was to it. He started to tell me about his life, how everything had fallen apart. He had lost his job, his family, and his home. He said he had no one to talk to, and he had reached a breaking point. Something in his voice made me pause, as if he really was just a man who had lost everything. But that did not make what he had done any less terrifying. I listened quietly, unsure of what else to do. He seemed desperate, broken, and full of sorrow. Still, I could not let my guard down. I had to find a way to get out of there safely. I started to talk to him, carefully choosing my words, trying to sound calm. I told him he needed help and that there were people who could give it to him. I reminded him that this was not the way to solve anything, and that kidnapping someone would only make things worse. He looked down, and for a moment I thought I saw regret in his eyes. The silence between us stretched long and thin, like a wire about to snap. After a while, he stood up and walked toward the door. I held my breath, waiting to see what he would do. He turned back to me and said he was sorry. Then he walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I sat there for a few seconds, stunned, then jumped to my feet and ran. I did not know if he was still nearby, but I did not stop to look. I sprinted through the warehouse, trying to retrace our steps. Every shadow made me flinch, but I kept going. Finally, I found the main door and pushed it open. Outside, the air felt cold and fresh, and I gasped as I took in a deep breath. I ran toward the gate, hoping it was still unlocked. To my relief, it swung open, and I burst out onto the empty street. I pulled out my phone and dialed for help with shaking fingers. The dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained what had happened. She stayed on the line with me until the authorities arrived. They found me sitting on the curb, trying to keep myself from falling apart. When they searched the warehouse, the driver was gone. It was as if he had vanished into the night. I gave them all the information I could, but they said it might be hard to find him. I did not understand how someone could just disappear like that. But I was safe now, and that was all that mattered. They took me home, and I promised myself I would never take my safety for granted again. For days after, I could not stop thinking about what had happened. I kept replaying every moment, wondering what could have gone differently. Sometimes I felt angry, sometimes scared, and sometimes just numb. I did not tell many people, because I did not want them to worry. But the memories stayed with me, heavy and real. Over time, I started to feel like myself again. I learned to trust my instincts more, to pay attention to the details that seemed off. I also learned that some people are just lost, hurting in ways we may never understand. That night could have ended very differently, and I was lucky it did not. I survived, and I carried that strength with me into every day that followed. I do not know why he chose me, or why he let me go. Maybe something I said made a difference, or maybe he had never planned to hurt me. I will never truly know. But what I do know is that I walked away from that warehouse, and I did not look back. I went home, where I belonged, and I held on to the life that could have been taken from me. Story 4. I still remember the last time I saw my best friend. It was the spring of our senior year in high school, and we had just finished our final exams. We walked home together like we always did, laughing about plans for college and summer. She said she would call me later that evening, but she never did. The next morning she was gone, and no one knew where or why. Her disappearance shattered me. Days turned into weeks, and the search continued with no answers. I spent countless hours helping her family distribute flyers, hoping for any lead. But the police found nothing, and eventually the search slowed down. People whispered theories, but none made sense. Her parents moved away a year after her disappearance. Our small town felt emptier without her. I finished high school with a heavy heart, haunted by unanswered questions. I went on to college, trying to focus on my studies. But I never stopped wondering what happened to her. 10 years passed, and I returned to my hometown after my uncle passed away. He had lived alone in the old farmhouse on the edge of town. He was a quiet man, a bit of a recluse, and we were never very close. Still, I felt responsible for going through his belongings. The farmhouse was dusty and cluttered with old furniture and books. My uncle had kept everything, from receipts to broken radios. It took me days to sort through the mess. In one of the drawers of his writing desk, I found a leather-bound journal. Its pages were filled with scribbled notes and entries, mostly mundane. But then I saw her name. It was written at the top of one of the pages. My heart stopped for a moment as I stared at it. I flipped back through the pages and saw it again, several times, always underlined. The entries were vague but disturbing. Phrases like "saw her again" and "still watching" were scrawled in his handwriting. I sat down on the dusty floor and read the entries carefully. They spanned over several months, starting around the time she vanished. My uncle had written about seeing her near the woods behind his house. He described her as looking lost and confused, sometimes afraid. One entry chilled me more than the others. He wrote that he had tried to talk to her, but she ran. He followed her once and saw her disappear into the trees. He claimed she wasn't alone, that someone else was with her. Someone he couldn't describe properly, only that they did not belong. I closed the journal and sat in silence for a long time. Could my uncle have known something about her disappearance? Why did he never say anything? I had to find out more. I searched every corner of the farmhouse for more clues. Behind a loose panel in the attic, I found a small wooden box. Inside were old photographs, newspaper clippings, and more handwritten notes. Some of the photos were of the woods, taken at odd times of day. One photo showed a blurry figure that looked like a girl standing near the tree line. I compared it to an old picture I had of her, and though the quality was poor, I felt certain it was her. My hands trembled as I held the photo. Something terrible had happened, and my uncle had known. I needed to go to those woods. The next morning I walked behind the farmhouse to the edge of the forest. The trees looked the same as they did when I was a child. I followed a narrow path that led deeper into the woods. Birds chirped above, but the deeper I went, the quieter everything became. I walked for nearly an hour before I found a clearing. In the center was a small, dilapidated cabin hidden by thick underbrush. It looked like no one had been there in years. The door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty and stale. The cabin had one room. There was a cot in the corner, a table, and shelves lined with old cans of food. On the table, I found more journals, all written by my uncle. These entries were more frantic, with notes about keeping her safe and not letting them take her again. He believed she was being hunted by something. There were drawings, too, strange symbols and figures with hollow eyes. One drawing showed her face, clearly drawn from memory. I sat on the floor and read every page. My uncle had written about a group, a cult that had once lived near the forest. They believed in ancient beings that lived between worlds. He claimed they had taken her. Not killed, but taken. He wrote that he had rescued her, that she stayed with him for a time. But she was never the same, he said. She spoke in riddles and often wandered at night. One night, she vanished again and he never found her. I left the cabin in a daze. My head was spinning with everything I had read. Was it all true, or had my uncle lost his mind? I could not be sure, but I believed he had seen her, and maybe even kept her safe for a time. Back at the farmhouse, I took the journals with me. I spent weeks going through them, researching everything he wrote. I found old records of the cult he mentioned. They had been active decades ago, but were believed to have disbanded. Some claimed they had practiced dark rituals to open doors to other realms. I contacted a local historian who had studied the group. He confirmed much of what my uncle had written. They had vanished suddenly, and their beliefs were never fully understood. He said some people believed the forest held places where the veil between worlds was thin. One night I dreamt of her. She stood at the edge of the woods, looking at me. She did not speak, but I felt she was trying to tell me something. When I woke up, I felt drawn to the forest again. I went back to the cabin. This time, I found something new. A silver locket hidden under a loose floorboard. I opened it and saw her picture inside. It was the same locket she had worn in high school. I held it tightly, tears streaming down my face. She had been here. I do not know where she is now. I do not know if she is alive in this world or another. But I know my uncle tried to protect her. He kept her hidden when no one else could. I believe she found a way to survive, even if I cannot understand how. Now I live in the farmhouse. I take care of the land and keep the journals safe. Sometimes I walk in the woods and leave small offerings in the clearing. Flowers, notes, little things she loved. I feel her presence there, like she is watching. Some nights I hear footsteps outside. They stop at the edge of the trees, just out of sight. I do not go to them, but I do not fear them either. I think it is her, letting me know she is still there. Still watching, still waiting. I will never stop looking. Not because I expect to find her, but because she deserves to be remembered. She was more than a mystery, more than a name in a journal. She was my best friend, and in some strange way she still is. I believe she left the locket for me, or a sign that she remembers too. Maybe one day we will see each other again. Not in this world, but in a place where time and space no longer matter. Until then, I will keep her memory alive. The woods are quiet now, but they hold stories that few understand. I walk among them not with fear, but with hope. Because even in the darkness, there are pieces of light, pieces of the ones we have lost, and the love that never fades. Story 5. I was a nanny. That was my job, my routine, and in many ways my identity. I took care of a child whose laughter became the highlight of my days and whose tears I worked tirelessly to ease. Every morning I would arrive a little before 7 a.m., greeted by the sound of cartoons on low volume and the smell of coffee wafting from the kitchen. The house was quiet but never cold. and despite its large size, it always felt lived in. The child was about 6 years old, curious and sweet. He asked a lot of questions about the world, some that made me smile and others that made me think deeply before answering. I enjoyed the routine we shared: breakfast, reading time, a walk in the park, followed by lunch and naps. His parents were often away during the day, the mother working long shifts at a clinic, and the father often in meetings or on calls. I never questioned their schedules because I respected their space and focused on my responsibilities. Despite being in their home daily, I never snooped or pried into their personal lives. My job was to ensure their child was happy, safe, and cared for. Over time, the father began to linger a bit more when I arrived or stayed a little longer when he returned. It seemed harmless at first, just casual conversation, small talk about weather, parenting books, or the child's favorite toys. He was always polite, never inappropriate, but I could tell he was lonely in a way he did not voice. One day, while tidying the living room after the child had gone down for his nap, I noticed something unusual. The father had been working in the study earlier and left the door slightly ajar. This was rare because he was usually private about that space. On the desk sat a leather-bound journal, open and angled slightly, as if he had been writing and left in a hurry. I tried not to look, not out of fear but respect. However, the writing on the page caught my eye. The first few lines were innocent notes about meetings, a grocery list, and reminders. Then the tone changed. He had written about feeling unseen and unappreciated. He questioned whether his marriage had lost its meaning, not out of anger but quiet despair. I read only a little before stepping back, heart pounding with guilt. I told myself it was not my place, closed the journal gently, and left the room. That moment haunted me. I had not meant to invade his privacy, but now that I had seen it, I could not ignore it. The next few days were quiet. He seemed more distant, as if he had been trying to mask emotions I now recognized. I continued my duties with more care, not out of pity, but because I saw the cracks in what had once seemed like a perfect family. The child remained my priority, his joy a temporary shield from the growing tension around us. About a week later, I overheard a conversation between the parents late in the evening. I had stayed later than usual due to a dinner engagement they had. The conversation was not heated, but the words were heavy. They talked about needing space, about how the routines had swallowed their connection. The mother sounded exhausted, the father weary. I sat in the playroom with the child, listening without meaning to, feeling the weight of adult problems in a house meant to be a child's sanctuary. Time passed, and the journal incident faded into the background of my thoughts. But the awareness it sparked lingered. I watched their interactions more closely now. There were moments of effort, shared smiles, joint planning for their child's birthday, and coffee left out for each other in the mornings. Yet, underneath it all, I sensed the undercurrents of disconnection. One afternoon, while the child played with building blocks, the father approached me. He asked if I enjoyed the job, if I ever thought about doing something else. I answered honestly. I told him I loved working with children, that it gave my life rhythm and purpose. He nodded slowly, like someone absorbing a truth he had not expected. Then he thanked me not just for the work, but for being a presence in the house, for bringing calm in what he called silent storms. It was an unexpected moment, one that stayed with me long after he walked away. I began to wonder how many people live in quiet struggle, unable or unwilling to voice their unhappiness. The mother, too, seemed to open up in small ways, leaving notes for me about her son's behavior or thanking me for my patience when he had tantrums. She never spoke directly about her relationship, but her eyes said enough. Tired, strained, searching for clarity. One evening, I arrived to find the father sitting on the steps outside. It was early, the sun barely rising. He looked up and motioned for me to sit. I hesitated but joined him. He did not speak at first, and I did not press. After a few minutes, he admitted he was moving out, all not because of anger or betrayal, but because they needed to figure things out separately. It was said quietly, without drama. He told me they would share custody, that the child would stay in the house with the mother for now. I listened, offering nothing more than silence and presence. There was nothing to say that would fix or change the situation. When he finished, he thanked me again, this time more deeply. He said the journal had been left out by accident, but maybe it had not been a mistake after all. Maybe it had been a call for something: acknowledgement, reflection, maybe even understanding. He stood, patted my shoulder, and went back inside. The next few months brought change, but not chaos. The mother grew stronger in her independence, more confident in her parenting. She began taking the child out on weekends, inviting family over more often. The father visited regularly, always gentle and present during his time with the child. The atmosphere in the house shifted from tension to healing. It was slow, but it was there. I continued my work, anchoring the child's day with stories, laughter, and consistency. He adapted well, better than I had feared. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for. He missed his father but understood the new routine. He would talk about his weekends with him and still light up when his mother walked into the room. There was love, just shaped differently now. Eventually, my role began to shift. The mother decided to reduce my hours so she could spend more time with her son. I understood and supported the decision. She was reclaiming something, perhaps her identity, her time, her strength. On my last full day, she gave me a card. Inside were words of gratitude, handwritten with care. She said I had been more than help, I had been part of their journey, a silent witness who brought peace in ways I may never fully understand. As I walked away from the house that day, I felt no sadness, only a quiet sense of completion. I had come into their lives at a fragile moment, unknowing and unnoticed, and had left with memories that would stay with me. I thought again about that journal, the words etched into the pages of a man searching for something real. Maybe we all leave journals behind, in different ways, hoping someone sees and understands. I never told anyone about what I read. It was not mine to share, but it shaped how I see people now. I pay more attention to the quiet moments, to what goes unsaid. Being a nanny taught me about more than childcare. It taught me about people, resilience, and the many forms that love and healing can take. And in a way that made all the difference. Story 6. It was a calm Tuesday morning when I first met the man who would turn my life upside down. I had just come back from a walk around my neighborhood and noticed a car parked near the entrance of my apartment complex. A man stepped out wearing a lanyard with an official-looking badge and introduced himself as a social worker. He said there had been reports of disturbances in the area and that he needed to speak with me. At first, I did not think anything of it because he spoke gently and looked very professional. He asked if he could come inside to ask me a few questions about the residents in my building. I hesitated, but convinced myself it was okay since he showed me what looked like proper identification. As soon as he walked into the living room, I felt a slight chill but dismissed it as nerves. He sat down across from me, pulled out a notebook, and began asking questions that did not really make sense. They were vague and unrelated to anything involving a social worker's job. He asked personal questions about my daily routine, whether I lived alone, and what times I usually left the house. That is when I started to feel uncomfortable. I responded carefully, keeping my answers short. He took a long pause, then smiled and said he needed to make a call. I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen, pretending to check the stove, while I quietly picked up my phone. I did not call anyone right away, but I kept it in my hand just in case. When I returned, he had stood up and was walking around the living room, examining photographs and personal items. I asked him to sit back down and reminded him I had somewhere to be soon. He looked at me for a long moment and nodded, then said he just had one last thing to check before he left. That was when everything changed. He suddenly lunged toward me, grabbing my wrist and knocking the phone out of my hand. My first instinct was to scream, but he covered my mouth with his hand. I struggled, kicking and trying to twist away, but he was strong and fast. He forced me toward the back door, which I had left unlocked earlier that morning. I realized then that he had been watching me for longer than I thought. He dragged me out to his car and shoved me into the back seat, quickly tying my wrists together with zip ties he pulled from his coat pocket. The windows were tinted, and the doors had no handles on the inside. Panic filled my chest as he drove off, speeding through unfamiliar roads. I tried to keep calm and focused on everything I saw, memorizing signs, buildings, and street names. I told myself I had to stay alert if I wanted to survive. We eventually arrived at a small, run-down house in the middle of nowhere. There were trees surrounding the area, and no other houses nearby. He pulled me inside, locked the door behind him, and led me down to a basement. The room was dark, with only one small window near the ceiling and a bare mattress on the floor. He untied my hands just enough so I could sit, then locked the door and left me alone. I sat there shaking, trying to think of what to do next. My hands were sore, and my mind was racing with fear. I checked the window, but it was too high to reach and nailed shut. The basement smelled of dust and mildew, and the silence made every sound I heard upstairs even louder. I knew I had to stay calm and think carefully about my next move. Over the next few hours, he came down only once to bring me a bottle of water and a sandwich. He said nothing, just stared at me for a moment before leaving again. I kept my distance and did not say a word. I waited until I heard the door lock again before I approached the food. I took small bites, not trusting if it was safe, but knew I needed strength to escape. That night was the longest night of my life. I barely slept, listening to the creaking floors above me. Every sound made my heart jump. I thought about my family, my friends, and everything I might never see again. But I also thought about survival and how I could turn this around. The next morning, I woke up with a plan forming in my head. I knew I had to gain his trust, or at least make him believe I was giving up. When he came down with more food, I tried to talk to him calmly. I thanked him for the food and asked if I could use the bathroom. He hesitated, then agreed, watching me closely as he led me upstairs. The bathroom door did not have a lock, so I had to move quickly. I spotted a small metal lid under the sink and quietly slipped it into my sleeve. It was not much, but I thought I might be able to use it to break the zip ties if I got the chance. He did not notice and took me back to the basement as soon as I was done. I sat down and began working on the ties the moment the door closed. It took hours of small movements and waiting for the right moment. My wrists were red and bruised, but eventually I felt one side snap free, I froze, listening to the silence above. I knew I had to time my escape perfectly or risk being caught. I waited until it was completely quiet for what felt like a long time before moving again. I stood up and checked the window again. I used the metal lid to try and pry the nails loose, but it barely budged. I turned to the door and checked the frame. To my surprise, it had a simple bolt from the outside, and I figured if I could force something under it, I might lift it enough to push the door open. I used a broken piece of wood from the mattress frame and wedged it underneath. After several tries, I finally heard a faint click. I pushed the door gently, and to my relief it opened. My heart raced as I crept up the stairs, making sure not to make a sound. The hallway was empty, and I could hear faint music coming from a room down the hall. I moved toward the front door, praying it would be unlocked. It was not, but I found a set of keys on a table nearby. I grabbed them, trying each one as quickly and quietly as I could. Finally, one clicked, and I opened the door slowly, stepping outside into the cool morning air. I ran, not looking back, into the trees until I reached a small road. I flagged down the first car I saw, and the driver immediately called 911. The police arrived within minutes and took me to a safe location where I gave them everything I remembered. They listened carefully and reassured me that I was safe now. Later, they found the man and arrested him. It turned out he had a long history of impersonating officials and had targeted others before me. Thankfully, this time he would not be able to hurt anyone else. The days that followed were difficult. I could not sleep well and found myself checking every lock in the house multiple times. But I also knew I had survived something terrible. I went to counseling and talked through every moment, learning how to rebuild the trust I had lost in people. It was not easy, but I was determined to take back control of my life. Now, whenever I walk into a room, I carry the strength of what I overcame. I do not ignore my instincts anymore, and I never take safety for granted. I also try to share my story with others, hoping it helps them stay alert and trust their gut. What happened to me was terrifying, but it did not destroy me. Instead, it revealed a strength I never knew I had. I learned that courage is not about facing fear without shaking. It is about facing fear and moving forward anyway. I may have been a victim for a short time, but I refuse to remain one. My story did not end in that basement. It continued with freedom, healing, and a commitment to live with awareness and purpose. Every day is a reminder that life can change in an instant, but so can our power to fight back. I look back now not with fear, but with pride for what I survived. I do not let that man define me. He may have taken my sense of safety for a moment, but he did not take my will to survive. And that made all the difference. Story 7. Nalfern. I always thought my childhood was ordinary. We lived in a small, quiet town, surrounded by woods and far enough from the city to make it feel like another world. My mother was strict but kind, the kind of woman who always made sure dinner was on the table by 6 p.m. and that we never missed church on Sundays. She had rules about everything: what we wore, who we talked to, even the books we read. At the time, I assumed she was just trying to protect us. It was not until I turned 23 that things began to unravel. I had moved out a few years before and was living in a nearby city, working and trying to figure out adulthood. She called me one evening, her voice strained, asking if I could come home for the weekend. There was something in her tone that made my stomach twist with unease. I agreed, thinking it was just family drama or maybe something wrong with the house. When I arrived, the house looked the same, but it felt colder, like the warmth I remembered had drained away. My mother seemed thinner, more tired, but she smiled as if everything was normal. She made my favorite meal, and we sat at the table like old times. Still, there was a heaviness in the room, something she wasn't saying. I waited, hoping she would open up. That night I could not sleep. I wandered the house, half out of nostalgia and half because something felt off. In the attic I found a box hidden behind old furniture, buried under dusty sheets. Inside were photos, handwritten letters, and strange symbols drawn on parchment paper. At first I thought it was some sort of old religious study or maybe a forgotten hobby. The letters were what caught my attention. They were addressed to my mother but signed by people I did not know. They spoke of rituals, of sacrifices, of purifying the soul through obedience and surrender. My heart pounded as I read, my hands shaking with disbelief. I kept reading, unable to stop, my mind racing with every horrifying sentence. I took the box downstairs and confronted her. At first, she denied everything, said it was a collection she had found and kept for research. But her eyes darted too much, and her hands trembled. I pressed her, begged her to tell the truth. Finally, she broke down and confessed something I still struggle to understand. She told me she had been part of a group for most of her life, long before I was born. They called themselves the Circle of Renewal, and their beliefs were twisted versions of religious doctrine. To them, the world was corrupt, and only through sacrifice could it be purified. Those who refused to join were seen as enemies of their mission. I felt like I was going to be sick. I asked her what kind of sacrifice she meant, hoping I misunderstood. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Human." My body froze, and the air seemed to disappear from the room. I could not speak, could not think. I ran outside and vomited in the yard. My mother followed, crying, begging me to understand. She said she never hurt anyone herself, only helped with preparations. As if that made it better. She told me she had left the group years ago, that she had tried to forget, to raise me differently. But the more I asked, the more it became clear that it was not entirely behind her. She still believed some of their teachings. She still had contact with a few members. And worst of all, she believed they would come back for her one day. That scared me more than anything. I spent the rest of that weekend in a daze. I did not sleep, I barely ate, and I avoided her as much as I could. My childhood memories now felt poisoned, every smile and holiday colored by the possibility that it had all been a front. I tried to make sense of it, to tell myself there had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. I went back to the city and cut off contact for weeks, but she called and left messages, each more desperate than the last. She apologized, pleaded for forgiveness, said she had no one else. I did not know what to do. I was torn between fear and guilt. Eventually, I spoke to her again, only to find her worse than before. She sounded paranoid, convinced that they were watching her. I asked who, but she would not say. I offered to help, to bring her to the city, but she refused. She said it was safer if she stayed hidden. One night I got a call from the local police. A neighbor had reported strange noises from the house, but when they arrived, they found my mother unconscious in the living room. She had tried to take her own life. They rushed her to the hospital, and I drove back immediately, my heart heavy with dread. She survived, but barely. When I visited her, she barely looked at me. Her eyes were distant, haunted. She mumbled about the past, about people who had turned away from the path and paid the price. I tried to reach her, to remind her of reality, but she slipped further into her beliefs. The hospital released her weeks later, and I arranged for her to stay in a care facility. It was the only place where she could be safe, where others could watch over her when I could not. I visited often, though the visits were hard. Sometimes she was lucid, and we talked about normal things. Other times she spoke in riddles, her voice filled with fear. I started researching the group, desperate to know more. Most of what I found was buried in obscure forums or old newspaper articles. There were rumors of missing people in our town years ago, unexplained disappearances, and even a few arrests. But nothing concrete, nothing that directly tied to her. Still, I knew the truth. I had seen the letters. I had heard her confession. Even if the world had forgotten or never believed in the group, I could not. I carried the weight of that knowledge every day. It sat on my shoulders like a stone I could never put down. I stopped trying to understand why she did it. I realized that sometimes people are drawn to darkness in ways that make no sense. Maybe she was broken long before I ever knew her. Maybe she thought she was doing the right thing. Well, either way, the damage was done. I decided to move on, not because I forgave her, but because I had to. I could not let her choices define my life. I focused on building something better for myself. I found a good job, made real friends, and slowly pieced together a life that felt mine. Even so, there are days when I wake up and wonder what might have happened if she had stayed in that group. If they had come for her, or for me. I sometimes imagine the worst, then force myself to stop. I remind myself that I got away, that I made it out. Years passed and I visited her less and less. She eventually stopped talking altogether, her mind lost to the past. I made peace with that in my own way. I could not change what she had done, but I could choose how to live with it. I chose peace, as best as I could find it. When she died, I felt a mix of sorrow and relief. I mourned the mother I thought I had, not the one I discovered. I buried her quietly, with no ceremony, no visitors. It felt right. There was no one left to mourn with. I kept one thing from the house, a small music box she used to play for me at night. It had no dark secrets, no hidden messages. Just a simple melody. I play it sometimes when the memories get too heavy, letting the sound take me back to when life felt safe. I never told anyone the full story. I figured most would not believe it. But I carry it with me, in the way I walk through life, in the way I protect my own peace. Some truths are too heavy to share, and some pasts are better left buried. Story 8. It started with a simple rule. From the moment I moved in with my boyfriend, he made it clear that there was one room I could never enter. The door remained locked at all times, tucked away at the end of the hallway on the second floor. I never saw him go in or out, but I knew he must have entered when I was not around. He said it was just for storage, that it was messy and unimportant, and I had no reason to doubt him, at least not at first. The rest of the house was open and welcoming, filled with cozy corners and warm lighting. We had dinners together, spent weekends watching movies, and talked about building a future. Still, the locked door stood out like a question left unanswered. Sometimes I would pass it while doing laundry or dusting, and I would wonder. I told myself not to pry, that everyone deserves some privacy. But the curiosity grew. I would lie awake at night, wondering what could possibly be behind that door. It was not just that I was told not to go in, it was the way he said it. His voice always had a slightly sharp edge when he mentioned it, like he was afraid. I tried asking once more gently, but he only repeated that it was off limits. I respected his boundary for months. I convinced myself it was not worth jeopardizing our relationship over something so trivial. But small signs started to wear at my patience. Sometimes he would disappear for an hour or two with no explanation, returning only when I had given up waiting. I once heard soft humming coming from the locked room, but when I mentioned it, he dismissed it as the wind or the plumbing. One day, he left for a work trip that was supposed to last the weekend. He kissed me goodbye early in the morning and promised to call when he landed. As soon as I heard the front door shut, I felt the weight of the silence settle in. I told myself I was just going to clean the hallway, maybe vacuum a little. But the truth was, I had already made up my mind. I walked to the door at the end of the hall, heart pounding in my chest. My fingers brushed the doorknob, cold and still locked. I searched the bedroom drawers, kitchen cabinets, and even his coat pockets until I found a small brass key tucked in a mug on the top shelf of the pantry. It had to be the one. My hands trembled as I slid it into the lock. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dimly lit room that smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, almost like old flowers. It was not at all what I expected. There were no boxes or clutter, no storage items. Instead, the walls were lined with shelves holding dozens of notebooks, photos, and small trinkets. A single desk stood near the window, and next to it, a tall glass case that drew my attention immediately. Inside the case were items that looked like they belonged to different people. A silver necklace, a child's drawing, a pair of broken eyeglasses. Everything was arranged with such care, almost reverently. I stepped closer and saw labels beneath each item, handwritten in neat letters. There were names, dates, and what looked like brief descriptions. It took me a moment to realize these were memorials. My chest tightened as I scanned the room again. On the far wall were photographs, dozens of them. Some were portraits, others were candid moments frozen in time. Every face was different, and none were familiar. I moved to the desk and opened one of the notebooks. It was filled with entries, descriptions of people, notes about where they were last seen, what they were wearing, what they had said. None of the entries had a clear ending. They just stopped. A chill ran through me. I read another notebook, then another. The pattern was the same. Names I did not recognize. People who had vanished. He had written them all down as if he were studying them, or maybe trying to remember them. I tried to tell myself he was just researching for a book or a project, something innocent. But deep down, I knew this was not innocent. I found a drawer beneath the desk and opened it, half expecting to find something terrible. Instead, there were dozens of old phones neatly stacked and labeled. I picked one up and pressed the power button. It lit up, revealing a wallpaper of a smiling woman I had never seen before. Her eyes seemed to look right through me. I scrolled through the messages. The last one said, "I'm almost there." It had been sent years ago. I dropped the phone, my hands shaking. I knew I should leave the room and call someone. But I kept looking, drawn by something I could not name. Beneath the glass case was a locked drawer. The same key opened it. Inside was a small journal, its leather cover worn smooth. The entries inside were different from the others, personal, emotional, They talked about guilt, loss, and the desire to make things right. It seemed he had known some of these people. A few of the entries mentioned dreams, nightmares, and strange coincidences. He wrote about feeling haunted, about how he kept their belongings to remember them. He thought if he could just remember enough, he might find peace. The journal ended with a single sentence written in shaky handwriting. I never meant for it to happen. I backed away slowly, heart racing, the weight of everything crashing down on me. I locked the drawer, closed the case, and left the room exactly as I had found it. I shut the door and put the key back in the mug. For hours, I sat in the living room, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of what I had seen. My mind raced with questions, but there were no clear answers. That evening, he called to check in, and I forced myself to act normal. I could not bring myself to confront him. Not yet. I needed time to think, to decide what to do next. Over the next few days, I watched him closely. Every smile, every casual word I examined for cracks. I could not stop wondering who he really was, what kind of life he had before me. Eventually, I found the courage to bring it up, carefully, without revealing too much. I mentioned the room again, asked why he was so secretive about it. He went quiet for a long moment, then said he had made mistakes in the past, people he had not been able to help, lives he had touched and lost. He said the room was his way of remembering them, honoring them. He promised he had never hurt anyone. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to the life we had built. But part of me knew that something in that room was not just about memory, it was about guilt, maybe even fear. I began looking for a new place to live. I did not tell him. I just needed space, time to think, time to breathe. A few weeks later, I moved out quietly while he was at work. I left a note thanking him for everything but explaining that I needed to find my own clarity. He never tried to stop me. We exchanged a few polite messages after that, but the connection faded. Sometimes I still wonder about that room. I wonder if he ever goes in there now, if he ever looks at those photographs and remembers the faces. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe the room was his way of coping. But I could not live with the uncertainty, with the silence between the pages of those notebooks. In the end, I chose peace. I chose to walk away not out of fear, but because I needed to find myself again. That locked room was not just a secret, it was a mirror, showing me things I had not wanted to see. And in stepping through its door, I found the courage to open one of my own. Story 9. I was only 16 when my sister was murdered. The news shattered my family in ways we never imagined possible. She had been my best friend, my role model, the person I looked up to the most. The police came to our house one night around 9 p.m. and told us the unimaginable. The man who did it was someone she had trusted, someone she knew. The trial was long and painful. We sat in the courtroom every day, listening to the details of what he did to her. My parents cried silently, holding hands so tightly their knuckles turned white. I watched him sit there with no emotion, like he did not care. The jury found him guilty, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought we would never hear from him again. But the first birthday after the trial, an envelope arrived addressed to me. Inside was a card, a simple birthday card with a short message that chilled me to my core. He said he hoped I was doing well. He wrote that he was thinking of me on my birthday. He ended it with a strange line about forgiveness and understanding. I remember tearing it up and throwing it away immediately. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I could not breathe. Every year after that, another card came, always around the same time, just before my birthday. Sometimes the message was short and strange, other times longer and even more confusing. He wrote about the past, about my sister, about our family. It felt like he was trying to reach into my life from behind bars. At first, I never told anyone. I was afraid it would reopen wounds that my parents were just starting to heal from. But the cards never stopped. I started to dread my birthday, not because I was getting older, but because I knew a card would come. It made me feel sick. I would open them just to be sure they were from him. I would read the words, trying to understand what he was trying to do. Was it guilt? Was it some twisted form of control? I could not tell. All I knew was that it felt wrong. Eventually, I told my mother. She was stunned and did not know what to say. She cried and hugged me, then told my father. He was furious and wanted to contact the prison. I begged them not to. I did not want any more attention drawn to it. I just wanted it to stop. But the cards kept coming. Each one felt like he was reaching out to hurt us again. It was like a game to him. He was in prison, but he still found a way to touch our lives. I kept the cards in a box under my bed, not sure why. I started therapy in my 20s to deal with the trauma. I talked about my sister, about the trial, and eventually about the birthday cards. My therapist helped me understand that this was his way of staying connected to the pain he caused. He wanted to make sure we never forgot. I struggled with the idea of forgiveness. Could I forgive someone who had taken so much from me? Could I move on without letting go of my anger? It felt impossible. But the more I talked, the more I realized that holding on to that anger was only hurting me. One year, I decided not to open the card. I left it on the kitchen counter and went out for a walk. The world felt lighter somehow. I knew the card was still there, but I chose not to let it inside my mind. That was the first step. After that, I started to heal in small ways. I changed my routine on my birthday. I surrounded myself with people who loved me. I told my therapist about the change, and we celebrated that moment. It felt like taking back some of my power. I still thought about my sister every day. She had been so full of life and laughter. Losing her changed the course of my life. But slowly, I started to live in ways that honored her memory. I pursued things she would have wanted for me. Afterwards, the cards became less important. They still came year after year, but they no longer had the same power over me. I still kept them, but only as a reminder of how far I had come. They were no longer symbols of fear, but of resilience. Eventually, I decided to write him a letter. It was not a letter of forgiveness, but of finality. I told him that he no longer had a place in my life. I told him I would no longer read his cards. I told him that he could never undo what he had done. I never got a response, and I did not expect one. But the next year, no card came. My birthday passed quietly, surrounded by friends and love. It was the first birthday in years that felt peaceful. I knew then that I had finally closed that chapter. Life moved on. I got married. I had children of my own. I told them stories about their aunt, about how wonderful she had been. I made sure they knew her name and what she meant to me. I kept her memory alive in a way that was beautiful and loving. Every once in a while, I would think back to those cards. The way they used to haunt me. The way they had followed me for so many years. but they no longer had that hold on me. I had taken control of my story again. There were days when I still felt the weight of everything. Grief does not vanish, it just becomes part of who you are. But I learned to carry it with grace. I learned that healing is not about forgetting, but about living with what happened and choosing joy anyway. I still visited my sister's grave sometimes. I would sit quietly and talk to her, even if no one was listening. I told her about my life, my family, my victories, and my sorrows. I promised her that I would never let what happened define me, that I would live for both of us. In the end, I found peace. It took years, and it was not easy. But I found it, not because he changed, or because I forgot, but because I chose to let go. I chose to be free from the shadow he tried to cast over my life. My sister would have wanted that. She would have wanted me to live fully, to laugh, to love without fear. I carried her strength with me always, and that strength is what got me through. In that way, she was never really gone. Now, when my birthday comes, I smile. I think of her. I think of the life I have built, and I am proud that I survived, proud that I did not let darkness win, and proud that, in the end, love was stronger than hate. Story 10. I have always worked the night shift at the city morgue. It is quiet, dimly lit, and filled with the kind of silence only death can bring. I got used to the cold smell of the place, the distant humming of the refrigeration units, and the slow shuffle of paperwork under flickering lights. Each night, I processed bodies that arrived, tagging them, checking identification, and logging every detail. It was routine, almost mechanical, and it helped me keep a sense of distance from the lives these people once lived. Some nights were busier than others, depending on the calls the police made or what the hospitals sent over. I had gotten used to the rhythm of it, the quiet moments between pickups, and the heavy lifting of bodies onto slabs. The only sound I often heard was the occasional buzz of the old vending machine or the distant rattle of a gurney's wheels. Most people would find it eerie, but to me, it was just a job. I was used to seeing death. It had been a long week filled with overdoses and accidents, and I was running on little sleep. That night, I came in just before 10 p.m. with a thermos of lukewarm coffee and a thick file of paperwork to go through. The air felt heavier than usual, but I chalked it up to exhaustion. The lights overhead flickered more than they normally did, casting brief shadows that seemed to stretch too long. I shrugged it off and began reviewing the intake forms from earlier that day. Around midnight, the phone rang. Dispatch told me that a body was being brought in from the south side of the city. Male, early 30s, found in an alley, no witnesses. I sighed and started prepping one of the drawers. It was another John Doe, no clear identification, and that usually meant hours of work and communication with the police to figure out who the person was. The paramedics arrived around 12:30 a.m. I met them at the loading dock and signed the necessary forms. They rolled the body in on a stretcher, covered with a white sheet. I wheeled it into the processing room and began the routine. Pull back the sheet, inspect for injuries, look for anything unusual. That was when I noticed something that froze me in place. Inside the right coat pocket of the deceased was a wallet. That was not unusual. I opened it up, expecting a driver's license, or maybe a library card. What I found made my hands tremble. It was my identification. My actual ID card from the office with my name and photo on it. I stared at it, blinking several times to make sure I was not imagining it. I pulled out the rest of the contents. There was a set of keys that looked exactly like mine, even had the tiny crack in the plastic that mine had from being dropped years ago. A crumpled receipt from the same coffee shop I always visited after work. And tucked into the back of the wallet was a folded piece of paper with my handwriting. I stumbled back, my chest tight. I rushed to the office and checked my bag. My ID was still in there, right where I always kept it. My keys were hanging on my belt. My wallet was zipped in the front pocket. And everything was there, and yet somehow all of it was also in the pocket of the body on the slab. My heart pounded in my ears. I returned to the processing room and stared at the body. The face looked familiar, but it was battered. Blood had dried along the hairline, and the eyes were closed. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence. Someone who just happened to look like me, who just happened to have identical possessions. But deep down, I knew it was not that simple. I checked the rest of the body. Same birthmark on the wrist, same scar above the left eyebrow. It was me. I was looking at myself, cold and dead on a steel table in the morgue where I worked. I leaned against the counter, feeling the weight of something I could not explain press against my chest. I was alive standing there, but I was also dead, lying on that table. I closed the body drawer and locked it. I needed air, needed to think. I stepped outside into the alley and lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. The night was quiet, but it felt wrong. The city sounds were muffled, as if I had slipped into a version of the world that was slightly off. I stared up at the sky, looking for something to explain what was happening. Back inside, I pulled the security footage for the last few hours. I watched the video of the paramedics arriving, wheeling in the body. Then I noticed something strange. In the video, I did not appear. They brought the stretcher in, and the body was processed, but I was never seen. The footage jumped from the paramedics to an empty room. No figure in my lab coat, no one opening the wallet. It was like I was invisible. I played it back again and again, each time the same result. The camera had no record of me handling the body. No footage of me reacting, no sign of my presence. I checked the camera outside. I watched the moment I stood in the alley, smoking. Again, nothing. The cigarette lit itself and hovered in the air. The door opened by itself. I was not there. My hands started to tremble harder. I grabbed a mirror from the break room and held it up. My reflection was there, but it looked off. My eyes were too dark, and there was a faint shimmer around my outline. I dropped the mirror, and it shattered into pieces. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I called the police and told them there had been a mistake with the body. They said they would send someone over in the morning. I waited, pacing the halls, glancing at the body drawer every few minutes. It felt like the drawer was pulling at me, like a magnet I could not resist. I fought the urge to open it again. The hours crawled by. The silence grew louder. At 4 a.m., I decided I needed answers. I pulled the drawer out and looked again. The body was still there, still me. But now, the eyes were open. They stared up at the ceiling, unmoving. My knees nearly gave out. I slammed the drawer shut and backed away, heart racing. I ran to the staff computer and searched every database for any clue. Nothing came up. No record of someone matching my description being admitted. No police report. No incident. I even checked the logs from earlier that night. There was no record of the paramedics arriving. My signature was missing from the intake forms. It was like none of it had happened. As the sun started to rise, the cold light of dawn filtered through the blinds. The phone rang. A calm voice on the other end said there was no body delivery scheduled that night. When I tried to explain, the line went dead. I was alone again, the hum of the morgue filling the air like a dull warning. I checked the drawer once more. It was empty. Completely clean, as if nothing had ever been stored there. I stepped back, confusion washing over me. I turned to leave the room, and the lights flickered violently. When they steadied, all the drawers were open. Every single one. Empty. My legs moved on their own, rushing me down the hall toward the exit. I flung open the doors and stumbled into the morning light. The city was bright and alive. People moved down the sidewalks. The world was still spinning. But something had changed. I could feel it deep in my bones. I did not return to work that night. I packed my things and left the city. I never told anyone the full story. Just that I needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. I took a job in a quiet town, far from the noise and strangeness. Now, years later, I still think about that night. I still remember the cold of the morgue and the face that looked like mine. I never found out what really happened. Whether it was a warning, a glitch in the world, or something more. But I learned not to look too closely at the things we are not meant to understand. I live quietly now. I do not tell people where I worked or what I saw. I avoid mirrors at night and never walk past hospitals if I can help it. But sometimes when I am alone, I feel the cold again. The chill of metal, the echo of drawers sliding shut. And I wonder if the version of me on that table ever really stayed dead. What matters is that I am still here. Breathing. Alive. That night changed me, but it did not break me. I survived, even if I can never explain how or why. Story 11. It started with an ordinary day that turned into something I could never have imagined. I had just returned home after a long day at work, exhausted and ready to relax. As I sorted through the mail, I noticed an envelope that looked unusual. It had no return address and was sealed with plain tape. Curious, I opened it carefully, wondering what might be inside. To my shock, inside the envelope were photographs of myself. But they were not ordinary pictures taken in public or at an event. These were intimate photos of me sleeping in my own bed. I stared at them, unable to believe what I was seeing. How could someone have taken these pictures without my knowledge? The feeling of violation washed over me instantly. I looked around my apartment, checking the windows and doors, convinced someone must have been inside while I was away or asleep. The thought that a stranger had somehow been inside my home sent chills down my spine. I wondered if this person had been watching me for days, maybe weeks. Every small noise suddenly felt threatening. I was no longer safe in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. My hands trembled as I gathered the photos and drove straight to the police station. I told them about the strange envelope and the pictures. I explained how I felt scared and violated. I expected them to take me seriously, but their reaction was disappointing. They asked if I had any enemies or if I might be playing a joke. I could tell they thought I was exaggerating or perhaps making it up. The officers listened politely but seemed doubtful. They suggested it might be a prank or someone trying to scare me for attention. I explained that I had never seen these photos before and that I had no idea who could be doing this. Still, they said there was little they could do without more evidence or proof. I left the station feeling helpless and even more vulnerable than before. Back at home, I searched for any signs of a break-in. There was no forced entry, no missing items, nothing obvious to explain how someone could have gotten in. I changed the locks and installed new security cameras, hoping to catch any suspicious activity. Every night, I'd double-check the doors and windows, but the fear never went away. I felt like I was constantly being watched, even when I was alone. Days passed, and then another envelope arrived. This time there were more photographs, but they were even more unsettling. The pictures showed me getting out of bed, my face still drowsy and unaware. The feeling of being invaded was suffocating. It was clear this person knew my routine when I slept and exactly where to aim the camera. It was terrifying to realize how much control they had without ever being caught. I reached out to friends and family, hoping for support. They listened with concern, but also urged me to be cautious. Some suggested it might be a prank from someone I knew, while others encouraged me to move to a safer place. I thought about leaving, but this was my home, my life. I did not want to give in to fear, but every day felt harder than the last. One evening, I stayed awake late, determined to catch whoever was behind this. The security cameras were recording, but nothing unusual showed up. I sat by the window, watching the street and waiting for any sign of a stranger. The quiet night seemed peaceful, but inside, my anxiety was building. I wondered if I was imagining things or if the person was clever enough to avoid detection. Weeks later, the police called me back, saying they had received a similar report from another neighborhood. They were starting to believe there might be a pattern. The idea that I was not alone in this brought a small sense of relief. They increased patrols and promised to keep me informed. It was the first sign that maybe things were changing, that my concerns were finally being taken seriously. In the meantime, I took self-defense classes and started carrying pepper spray. I learned to trust my instincts and stay alert at all times. I also began documenting every strange occurrence in every new envelope that arrived. Keeping a record gave me a sense of control in a situation that felt completely out of my hands. Slowly, I started to feel a little stronger. One night, as I was falling asleep, I noticed a shadow outside my window. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The figure disappeared quickly, but the feeling of being watched returned with full force. I called the police immediately, and this time they responded quickly. When they arrived, they found footprints around my apartment and signs that someone had tried to tamper with the locks. That night, I finally felt that I was not alone in this fight. The police took the investigation seriously and set up surveillance to catch the intruder. The fear that had consumed me for so long started to ease, replaced by cautious hope. I realized that even though this person had invaded my life, I was not powerless. There were people willing to help me and protect me. After several tense days, the police caught someone trying to sneak into another apartment nearby. They found equipment used to take photos secretly. It was a relief to know that the person responsible was finally in custody. The thought that they had been watching me all this time was chilling, but justice was beginning to take shape. I was finally able to start healing. With the case resolved, I slowly reclaimed my life. The fear did not disappear overnight, but I learned to live with it. I became more cautious but also more confident. I understood the importance of trusting my instincts and speaking up. The experience taught me how strong I really am, even when I feel vulnerable. Now, when I look back, I realize how important it was to keep fighting. Even when people did not believe me at first, I did not give up. I trusted myself and sought help until I was heard. The invasion of my privacy was terrifying, but it also showed me how resilient I can be. My story is a reminder to never ignore the feeling that something is wrong. I share my experience with others to encourage them to take their fears seriously. If something does not feel right, it probably is not. It is okay to ask for help and to keep pushing until you are listened to. We all deserve to feel safe in our own homes, and no one should have to face this kind of violation alone. Surviving this ordeal changed me in many ways. It made me more aware, more cautious, but also more determined. I will always carry the memory of those frightening nights, but I will not let them define me. My life goes on, stronger and wiser, with a new sense of courage. I have learned that even in the darkest moments, there is a way forward. Story 12. It was an ordinary day at work when everything changed. I was working the evening shift at the hotel front desk, a job I had taken to pay the bills and support myself. But the lobby was quiet at first, only a few guests coming and going. I was used to routine, answering questions, checking people in and out, and handling reservations. Nothing about this night suggested it would be anything other than normal. Around 8 p.m., a group of guests arrived together, acting strangely. They seemed nervous and avoided making eye contact, speaking in hushed tones. I noticed that the women in the group were dressed in ways that seemed out of place for a hotel setting. One of the men constantly watched the others with a sharp, controlling gaze. Something about their behavior made me uneasy. They asked for several rooms, paying in cash, and requested to have the rooms on separate floors. I followed procedure, but my instincts told me to pay closer attention. When I handed over the key cards, the man who seemed to be in charge insisted on holding all of them himself. I found this unusual but did not want to cause a scene. Still, I made a mental note to keep an eye on their activity. Later that evening, a female guest approached the desk, clearly distressed. She looked around nervously before quietly asking if she could call someone for help. Her voice trembled, and she kept glancing toward the elevators as if afraid to be seen. I immediately sensed she was in trouble and told her I was here to help. I offered to let her use the phone in the back office for privacy. As she spoke in a low voice, I learned she was trapped in a situation she could not escape from. She revealed that the group staying in the hotel was not there for a vacation. They were part of a larger, dangerous network, and she was being held against her will. I was shocked and unsure how to respond. Her courage to confide in me sparked something I could not ignore. I carefully called the local authorities and explained the situation, requesting immediate assistance. The woman gave me details about her captors and the rooms they occupied. While waiting for the police to arrive, I kept her calm and reassured her that help was coming. It was one of the most intense moments of my life, knowing a crime was unfolding right under my nose. But when the police arrived, they moved quickly and quietly through the hotel. I showed them the rooms the suspicious group had rented, and they found evidence of the operation. Several victims were rescued from the rooms, scared but unharmed physically. The traffickers were arrested, and the victims were taken to safety. The hotel lobby filled with a flurry of activity as officers secured the area. In the days following, I worked closely with investigators to provide statements and assist with the case. I learned how extensive the trafficking ring was and how many lives had been affected. It was overwhelming to realize how easily this could have gone unnoticed if I had not been paying attention. The hotel became a safer place, and I felt a sense of pride in what had been accomplished. The experience changed how I viewed my job entirely. I no longer saw it as just a routine way to earn money, but as a role that held responsibility and potential impact. I became more vigilant and aware of the signs of danger around me. It also made me realize the importance of listening and trusting my instincts when something feels wrong. I connected with support groups that help survivors of trafficking and learned more about how these networks operate. I wanted to be part of the solution, not just a bystander. I also shared my story anonymously to raise awareness among others in the hospitality industry. Many people do not realize how common these crimes can be, or how they might unknowingly encounter them. The rescued individuals started the difficult journey of healing and rebuilding their lives. I felt honored to have played a small role in their rescue. Their strength and resilience inspired me to keep fighting for justice in any way I could. I volunteered with local organizations, using my voice to help advocate for victims. Months later, the case went to trial, and the traffickers were sentenced to long prison terms. It was a victory not just for the victims, but for the entire community. The hotel implemented new security measures and staff training to prevent similar situations. I continued to work there, knowing I had helped create a safer environment for everyone. The whole ordeal was exhausting but deeply meaningful. I learned that even the smallest actions could have enormous consequences. Being alert, compassionate, and willing to act made all the difference. It showed me that sometimes ordinary people can do extraordinary things when faced with injustice. Looking back, I never imagined my job would put me in the middle of such a serious situation. It reminded me how important it is to pay attention to the world around us, and to notice when something is off, and to have the courage to speak up. Because sometimes those small moments of bravery can save lives. I still remember the look of relief in the eyes of the woman who asked for help that night. It motivates me to keep fighting for those who cannot fight for themselves. I know the road to recovery for the victims is long, but I take comfort in knowing they are free now. The experience strengthened my belief that kindness and vigilance can change the course of someone's life. From that day forward, I approach my work with a new sense of purpose. I want to make a difference in the lives of the people who cross my path, whether guests or colleagues. The world is not always safe, but each of us has the power to protect and to care. That is a lesson I will carry with me forever. If my story teaches anyone anything, it is to trust their instincts and to never be afraid to act. Sometimes, saving a life depends on noticing what others miss. And sometimes, the quiet work of a hotel receptionist can be the first step toward breaking a chain of suffering. I am proud to have been part of that process, and I will never forget what happened that night. Story 13. I grew up believing the story my adoptive parents told me about where I came from. They said I was found abandoned at a hospital with no family to claim me. Their voices carried a mixture of sorrow and relief when they told me I was their gift from fate. I accepted it without question, trusting them completely. For years, that story was all I knew about my past. As I got older, small doubts began to creep into my mind. Certain details did not add up, like why the hospital records they mentioned were sealed. They avoided answering when I asked about my birth parents or the circumstances of my adoption. Whenever I pushed for answers, they changed the subject or grew uncomfortable. It felt like they were hiding something, but I did not want to upset them. One day, curiosity got the better of me, and I started looking into public records on my own. I visited libraries and searched online databases, hoping to find even a scrap of information. What I found was confusing and disturbing. There was a murder investigation that happened around the time and place I was supposedly born. The victim was a young woman, and the case had never been solved. The more I dug, the more connections I found to my supposed origins. Some of the people involved in the investigation had names that matched those from my early adoption papers. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was there, buried beneath layers of forgotten news articles and court documents. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized my life might be linked to something far darker than I had ever imagined. I confronted my adoptive parents with what I had discovered. Their faces paled, and they exchanged looks I had never seen before. After a long silence, they finally admitted the truth. They said I was connected to the woman who was killed, and that my adoption was part of a cover-up. They begged me to stop digging, warning that some secrets were dangerous to uncover. But by then I was already too deep. They explained that the woman had been involved with people who wanted to hide her disappearance. My birth had somehow become entangled in the mess, and my adoption was arranged to protect me from harm. They claimed they had done everything they could to keep me safe, but the weight of the secret was heavy on all of us. I did not know how to feel. Part of me was grateful, but another part felt betrayed. I decided I needed to understand the full story, no matter the risks. I reached out to people connected to the case, including former detectives and journalists who had followed the investigation. Some refused to talk, but others shared fragments of what had happened. They told me about a tangled web of lies, corruption, and fear that had kept the truth hidden for years. Piece by piece, the story unfolded. The woman had been caught in a dangerous situation with people who did not want her to talk. When she disappeared, many suspects had reasons to keep quiet. The investigation was compromised from the start, and key evidence was lost or destroyed. My arrival into the world had somehow been manipulated to erase traces of her existence. The more I learned, the more I understood how fragile my own life was. I realized that the people who raised me had risked everything to protect me from the fallout. At the same time, I felt a deep sadness for the woman whose life was stolen and for the family left without answers. It was a pain I had inherited without knowing it. Yet I also felt a strange connection to her, as if her story was part of mine. I chose to honor her memory by continuing to seek justice in my own way. I shared what I had learned with advocates working on cold cases and missing persons. I spoke out about how secrets can destroy lives and the importance of truth, no matter how painful. It was not easy, and I faced many obstacles along the way, but I knew it was the right path. Slowly, things began to change. New leads emerged and some old witnesses came forward. The case gained renewed attention, and a fresh investigation was opened. I could not undo the past, but I could help shine a light on it. That gave me a sense of purpose, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. In the end, I realized that the story my adoptive parents told me was not just a lie, but a shield. They had tried to protect me from a terrible truth, but I needed to know who I really was. Learning the truth was painful, but it also made me stronger. I was not just a victim of circumstances, I was a survivor with a voice. I found peace in accepting both the light and dark parts of my history. I understood that the past would always be a part of me, but it would not define me. I carried the memory of that woman with me, honoring her by living my life fully and honestly. At last, I felt free from the shadows that once clouded my origins. My journey showed me that truth, no matter how difficult, can heal wounds. It taught me the power of resilience and the importance of seeking answers. Though the road was long and filled with pain, it led me to a place where I could finally call my story my own. I was no longer lost in secrets or lies. I had found myself. Story 14. I never imagined that I would be dating a serial killer. At first, everything seemed normal. We met at a small coffee shop in town, and he was charming and attentive. He made me laugh like no one else could, and I felt a connection I had never felt before. I thought I had found someone special. Our dates were simple but meaningful. Sometimes we would take long walks by the river, and other times we would stay in and watch old movies. He always listened to me, never rushing or interrupting. I trusted him more than anyone else I had ever known. It felt like we were building something real. He was private about his past and rarely talked about his family or childhood, or when I asked, he would change the subject or say it was complicated. I did not push because I liked him enough to be patient. Besides, I believed that everyone had a few secrets. It did not seem suspicious at the time. One evening, we were having dinner at his apartment. The lights were dim, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon. He was telling me a story from work, but his phone kept buzzing on the table. He ignored it, but eventually he had to check. I saw the screen light up with a news alert. Curious, I picked up the phone and opened the notification. It was a breaking story about a man wanted for multiple murders in the area. The picture was clear, and my breath caught in my throat. It was him. It was him. The man I had been dating for months, smiling just a few feet away from me. I could not believe what I was seeing. My hands shook as I handed the phone back to him. He looked calm but tired. Then he confessed everything. He said he had been living a double life for years, unable to control the dark urges inside him. He told me he never wanted to hurt me. I felt frozen in place. My mind was spinning with fear and disbelief. How could I have missed all the warning signs? The late nights he could not explain, the strange phone calls, the odd places he sometimes disappeared to. Everything made sense now, but it was too late to go back. He begged me not to call the police. He said he was tired of running, and that he wanted to end it all. I wanted to scream, to get away, but I was trapped by the shock. I promised to keep his secret, even though I knew it would haunt me forever. I stayed with him that night, feeling more lost than ever. The next morning I went to work pretending everything was normal, but my mind was racing. I knew I had to do something, but fear kept me silent. I was scared of what he might do if I betrayed him. I felt like I was living in a nightmare from which I could not wake. Days passed, and the news coverage intensified. Every channel showed his face, repeating the same chilling details. I saw the pain in the eyes of his victims' families on television. It broke me inside to realize how close I had been to such darkness. I could not bear the thought of anyone else being hurt. One afternoon, I finally found the courage to call the police. I told them everything I knew, giving them the details he had tried to hide. They assured me that my safety was their priority and that I would be protected. It was the hardest decision I ever made, but I knew it was the right one. Soon after, the police arrested him. The moment he was taken away, a heavy weight lifted off my chest. I cried like I had never cried before, overwhelmed by relief and sorrow. I still could not fully process how the man I loved could be capable of such evil. Therapy helped me heal slowly. I learned to separate the man I thought I knew from the monster he really was. I surrounded myself with friends and family who supported me through the darkest times. Their love reminded me that I was not alone and that I deserved peace. I realized that sometimes evil hides behind a kind smile. It taught me to trust my instincts more and to never ignore red flags. But most importantly, I learned to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner. It was not my fault, and I was not responsible for his actions. Years later, I still think about that time in my life. It shaped who I am and how I view the world. I am stronger now, wiser and more cautious. I still believe in love, but I know it must be grounded in honesty and respect. I am grateful for the chance to start over. I found a new passion for helping victims of abuse and violence, wanting to make a difference. Every day I remind myself that survival is an act of courage, and that even in the darkest moments there is hope for light. Sometimes when I see his face on old news clips, I feel a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the lives lost and relief that I escaped. I hold on to the belief that no one is defined by the darkness around them. We all have the power to heal and move forward. The experience changed me forever, but it did not break me. I learned to trust again, carefully and slowly. I now understand the importance of listening to that small voice inside when something